Good morning. It's Reverend Mike Capron from the First Presbyterian Church of Elmwood Park. It is July 3rd, 2022, and our reading this morning is from Jeremiah. Now, Jeremiah lived in a time when the state of Israel was not doing well, and this reading from John 9, 3 through 6 reflects the conditions of his time. They make ready their tongue like a bow to shoot lies. It is not by truth that they triumph in the land. They go from one sin to another. They do not acknowledge me, declares the Lord. Beware of your friends. Do not trust anyone in your clan, for every one of them is a deceiver, and every friend a slanderer. Friend deceives friend, and no one speaks the truth. They have taught their tongues to lie. They weary themselves with sinning. You live in the midst of deception. In their deceit, they refuse to acknowledge me, declares the Lord. That's the end of our reading. I want to tell you about a garden in Los Angeles. By the way, I will be quoting liberally from theologian Craig Keene in his book, After Crucifixion. In 1986, the city of Los Angeles acquired 14 acres of land on which it intended to build an incinerator. By 1992, their plans changed, and generously, they offered the use of the land to the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank. The food bank, in turn, offered it to the residents of the community. I'm going to start the quote from Craig Keene. The people responded. Marginalized, largely propertyless people walked from the houses and apartments where they had slept too little after working too long, methodically cleared the land, and covered it thickly with fertile soil they carted in and raked smooth. A decade later, those 14 acres of earth stretched out as a well-tended green and brown patchwork quilt garden. Ancestors' seeds bedded in rows as straight as the hoe handles strong hands had held to draw them. Blessed by an endless growing season without frost or flood, nutritional and medicinal plants at any given moment quietly stirred, ripening. Some not yet breaking through the soil to the abundant sunlight above, some taller than the children, women and men who gave them time, sweat, and compost and water that they carried to them in buckets. Families gathered to work side by side, breathing air cleaned by the leaves of stalks rooted in new earth and rising to redeem the brown-gray sky. Children running down paths between garden plots, playing, dancing, making the mischief and the art that children make. Their mothers, fathers, grandparents with dirty boots, knees and hands working, sometimes laughing, sometimes troubled, usually simply on task. Corn, potatoes, chilies, cilantro, cactus, onions, tomatoes, tomatillos, agave, yam, sugarcane, beans, alfalfa. Plots were dotted with avocado, walnut, banana, guava, other fruit and nut trees. In all, there thrive between 100 and 150 species of nutritional and medicinal plants. Of course, there would be nothing particularly startling in all of this were these parcels situated in farm country, someplace far from South Central LA. But in South Central LA, blighted property in a blighted neighborhood came to life. End quote. Not a great story. It just makes you feel good, doesn't it? I wish I could end it there, but as in Genesis, evil attacked the garden. One of the previous owners of the land asserted that since the incinerator was not built, he had the right to repurchase his parcel. He bought it back for roughly $5 million. He turned around and set an asking price of $16 million. Miraculously, a number of nonprofits and donors raised that amount, but then he still refused to sell, insisting that he'd been insulted. Here was the result. On the morning following Independence Day, July 5th, 2006, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department cleared their way for a crew that over the next 2 days systematically bulldozed the fruit of over a decade of the sweat and pain and care of hundreds of people of this land. 7 years later, the acres lay untended. A perimeter fence locked the farmers out, the seeds of their ravaged gardens stirring and sending out green shoots, which the city from time to time mowed down, leaving brown earth and stubble beneath the dust their tractors threw up. End quote again. Did the property owner have the legal right to do this? Yes. But what is legal and what is wise are not always the same. I'm reminded of a story many of us looked at last week from 1 Samuel 25, where Nabal, the fool, whom I dubbed idiot, refused to give anything to David and David's followers. He was within his rights, but God and history have not looked kindly on Nabal. And I am just going to go ahead and say that bulldozing a lovingly tended garden so you can put up fencing and let the land be empty was a cruel and evil thing to do. He wouldn't even let them take seeds in hopes of future planting. He killed the future as well as the present. But there's one more thing that happened while the farm was active that I want to share with you. Another miracle, another harvest. Divided into plots, cared for by over 350 documented and undocumented families, largely of Mexican and Mesoamerican descent, the South Central Los Angeles farm, as it came to be called, grew to be perhaps the largest urban garden in the nation. The discipline that gave rise to the farm was also homegrown. The people who worked this land organized it into 8 sections, each of which elected a council member, the council itself electing a president. The farm council oversaw the land, kept plots tended, collected a little money for the water the food bank made available, and got out of the way of people who had long before learned from their parents and grandparents, who learned from their parents and grandparents how to care for the earth and its bounty. Did you hear it? The people of the neighborhood formed a little democracy to manage the garden, or the farm as they called it. This should be very important to us on this Independence Day weekend 2022. This week, a family member asked me why Christians should care about democracy, and I told her it is because we love people. We follow Jesus' command to love our neighbor as ourselves. Well, what does that have to do with democracy? Democracy is the form of government where we acknowledge that people are untrustworthy sinners. Because people are untrustworthy, no one should be given too much power. We also don't let them keep their power forever. They can be voted out of office. That is why both the United States government and Presbyterian government operate in the form of a democracy. So what is the most critical part of this system? The means by which we conduct and certify an election. If that part fails, the system fails, and then we are subject to the whims of whatever ambitious people can seize power by any and all means. Attacking that election part of the system is like bulldozing the garden of our democracy and putting up a fence around it so no future seeds can be planted. And my friends, we cannot allow this to happen. I last spoke to the congregation about this subject on January 10th of 2021. Fresh from the shock of January 6th, our country stood in near unity in decrying the events of the preceding week. I was on the same page with Bill Barr, Liz Cheney, Nancy Pelosi, Kevin McCarthy, and Mitch McConnell. The American miracle, the peaceful transfer of power from one president to the next, had been interrupted, and we were all very clear that this could not stand. Unfortunately, our unanimity only lasted a week or two. Bill, Nancy, and Liz and are still standing with me, but Kevin and Mitch and their friends have stepped back so far I have to strain my eyes to see them. The public hearings of the House January 6th committee have given us a much clearer picture of the breadth and intensity of the efforts of then President Trump and his allies to spread misinformation and steal an election that he lost. This committee has brought forth testimony, emails, texts, and documents. I remind you that the administrator's own overseer of election security, Christopher Krebs, pronounced it fair. He was immediately fired for saying that. Republican Attorney General Bill Barr told the president that allegations of election fraud were BS. So did every judge before whom a case was brought and all the state officials who oversee elections. Since then, all the recounts, even those from dubious sources, have reaffirmed the outcome. For you viewing this on the internet, I'm going to put a video clip in the comments. One line in the clip is from Representative Schiff, who recently said, "If you can convince Americans that they cannot trust their own elections, that at any time they lose it is somehow illegitimate, then what is left but violence to determine who should govern?" That's the nightmare scenario, right? We dodged a bullet after the 2020 election, and I fear there are more bullets coming our way in 2022 and 2024. It is perfectly legitimate for people of good conscience to have varying views of candidates and their policies, but I am going to say that it is out of bounds to conduct a misinformation campaign against the integrity of our election systems. I'm going to call foul on that, and I wish I had the referee's authority to throw some people out of the game. Everyone who studies the rise of autocrats says that it is a crucial step to discredit reliable sources of information. Would-be autocrats don't necessarily need you to believe them. They just need you to throw up your hands and say, "Everybody lies. I can never know the truth." When you hear somebody saying that, watch out. That's what they want you to do. Believe you can never know the truth. So what are we to do? First, pray. The congregation and I will be doing that in a few minutes. Second, bring whatever wisdom and experience you have. A majority of people hearing my voice will remember times when our politics was not as divided, when opposing parties respected each other and deemed each other to at least be legitimate. Third, support the election system and the officials who maintain it. As you will see in the video, they need support. Fourth, you could stop watching any news source or commentator that asserts that the 2020 election was invalid. Fifth, and this gets a little more personal, you can join me in refusing to vote for any candidate of any party who undermines the integrity of the 2020 election. I am desperately trying not to be partisan, but it is true that at this moment it is a subset of Republicans who do this. However, if radical Democrats decide to start copying the tactics of radical Republicans, then we could wind up in a position where both parties dispute any election they lose. And as Representative Schiff said, if you can convince Americans that they cannot trust their own elections, that any time they lose it is somehow illegitimate, then what is left but violence to determine who should govern? This Independence Day weekend, we acknowledge that the garden of our democracy was built at great cost starting in 1776. I have ancestors who fought in that struggle, and they fought to free us from tyranny. As Christians, we believe in democracy as one of our best protections against human fallenness and sin. We believe that creating and maintaining such a system is one way that we love our neighbor as ourselves. So please, don't let it be bulldozed. For God's sake, do not let it happen. Amen.